All right. Hey, everyone. So welcome back. We are now concluding our conversation about building an organization that's not just capable of conceptualizing and coming up with this strategy, but also executing that strategy effectively. We've talked a little bit about what that looks like, how we build that type of an organization, some of the suggestions that we would have, and some of the things we need to emphasize. So we started off by emphasizing these three key actions that we've begun talking about. We've already discussed this idea of how we staff such an organization and how we continue to develop and strengthen those critical resources those individuals we've staffed provide us, whether it be through our processes, their skills, their knowledge, their abilities, any of these kinds of things. And our final one we want to go over today is stressing the importance of this key action of being sure that we structure our organization effectively, right? How do we organize those value chain activities and processes so that they support our strategy? How do we establish the authority and reporting relationships necessary? This can also include things like deciding how much decision-making authority exists at every level of our hierarchy, right? Who's allowed to decide what? How do those processes really look? These are all important things for the functionality of our organizations, so we can understand why it would be a really critical conversation for us to have when we surround this idea about how it supports our structure after we've conceptualized something we hope will work, right? So essentially here, we have basically 5 key things that we want to stress about each firm's organizational structure, right? Each firm's organizational structure, it is going to be partly a product of its own situation, right? It's determined by what were our prior organizational patterns, what were our prior internal circumstances, how did things work here before, what does the executive judgment look like amongst the people who are at our highest levels of that hierarchy, what do the reporting relationships established look like in the past. So we have to take all these into considerations, and not every single one of our organizations starts at the same, starting block. Right. Well, first and foremost, one thing we do want to keep in mind when we're talking about how to effectively structure an organization so it can support our strategy effectively is we want to make sure that the appropriate, as it says here, the appropriate value chain activities are going to be performed by us internal to the organization. And we make sure we outsource some of our capability deficient areas, things that we can't do very well or might be extremely expensive for us to develop those abilities. We want to try to outsource those kinds of things. What this allows for is for us to really concentrate our full focus on and our full amount of resources on activities that are core to our strategy and also create unique value that we're trying to provide as an organization, right? It allows for us to lower costs, heighten our strategic focus, have less bureaucracy in place in our organization, make faster decisions, have a better arsenal of strategic capabilities, all these important things for us, right? But we also want to stress this in blue here, right? Make sure that our internally performed strategic critical activities are in fact that building block for our structure, right? We understand which areas and which functional places are strategy critical areas, places we have to succeed in if we are going and be strengthened and have a really strong, tight, effective operating process in these specific functioning areas, because those are the building blocks for our organizational structure and how it's going to support our strategy in the long term. When we make the activities that are critical to executing our strategy the basis for how we make our organizational structure decisions. So basically, we're saying we know what our structure is going to need in order to, or our strategy will need to support it. So we're going to structure our organization around what's really critical to it. It really helps us. Doing that really helps us ensure that there is adequate decision-making influence for every critical activity within our organization. Very important, as we talked about, the top-down influence of how every single level has to have their eyes on the prize, understand what our strategy is all about, and be looking for opportunities to actively support it. So our most important areas, you can be damn sure they're so important to our organizational structure. We have to have those places. We have to have those elements of our structure in place and emphasize strongly. They are what will support our strategy long term. We also need to make sure that appropriate amount of authority is centralized at the top, and that the remaining amount actually is delegated appropriately below it, right? We can either use a centralized or we can use a decentralized decision-making structure in our organizations. Either comes top down or it's more flattened, as we've come to talk to it about it. So both have drawbacks and both have advantages, absolutely. But we need to continually consider about which one is right for our firm, and understand that what's right for us may not just be, like this prescription that will be successful for all. We have to understand what that situation is, understand how things have worked in the past, what we will be able to implement, without inciting some sort of riot amongst people, and make sure that the right decisions for our situation are made. How critical are those decisions? How much autonomy can we give people in the decision-making process? What's going to be right for our situation? And more so, make sure that we really support this idea of cross-unit coordination, right? We want to remove as many roadblocks as possible. We want to make it as easy for people to collaborate across units, make sure that we work as a conducive whole. We are an organization. We are not just a bunch of parts kind of working together. When we support collaboration across our units, it really means that members of different units get a way more in-depth involvement and understanding of the whole process. They understand their part to play in the larger process. They understand the realities of other people's goings on within the organization. And this can include basic things like, fulfilling orders. It can be introducing new products. It can be improving product quality, any of these kinds of things. Responding to customer feedback, just understanding the realities of these different elements of the business overall. The big caveat is that we often say, sure, collaborating with other units, I support that. But then we're not very conscientious about living up to our commitment. Our best organizations that are going to have a structure that really supports the strategic elements and the outcomes that the organization wants to accomplish, they're going to pay attention to this, and they're going to treat it as more than lip service, right? And then finally, we need to make sure we stress necessary collaboration with not just within our organization, but outside of it, right? Our suppliers, our strategic allies, we encourage and support them. Not just say, we think it's a good idea, but we also provide the resources and support necessary to make them a reality. So unless constructive organizational bridge building and with our external parties occurs, and productive working relationships emerge from that, the value of our partnerships and alliances is completely lost, right? Our firm's power to execute is weakened, no doubt about it. So organizational capabilities often emerge from, a process of consciously knitting together the efforts within and outside of our organization with different groups, departments, external allies, all these things. It's a delicate dance. It's a thing we knit together. It is all of us working together. Our best strategies are only accomplished when we embrace that idea and we really commit to this idea about working with others, both within and outside of our organization. So what do we deduce from this whole conversation, right? Well, pretty simple. Effective strategy execution is important. We've discussed why. And essentially, the only dependable path toward durable competitive advantage here is to out-execute other firms. And how do we do that? We do that through these considerations we've talked about in this lesson here, and stressing that staffing, development, organizational structure, all of these important things, these things that support our strategy and make it so that pulling this thing off and executing it is not just a pipe dream of ours, but it becomes a legitimate reality.